And Microsoft took a big gamble to write for the Mac. And they came out with applications that were terrible.
In 1996, Steve Jobs sat down for a documentary interview and said something about Microsoft that the tech press largely dismissed as sour grapes from a man whose company was failing. He said Microsoft has no taste.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste.
He said they have absolutely no taste.
They have absolutely no taste.
And then he explained what he meant, because he knew people would misread it. He was not talking about fonts or color schemes. He was talking about something deeper. He said, Microsoft does not think of original ideas, and they do not bring much culture into their products.
They don't think of original ideas, and they don't bring much culture into their product.
That was nearly 30 years ago. Jobs was broke, Apple was one bad quarter from bankruptcy, and Microsoft had won. Bill Gates had won. The PC wars were over, and Jobs himself said so in the same interview. He was not predicting collapse. He was making a precise, specific criticism about the soul of a company. And then Windows 11 happened. Mandatory hardware requirements that locked out 240 million working computers. A forced Microsoft account just to use a machine you already paid for. An AI assistant that could not be removed, watching your screen and storing what it saw. A feature called Recall that captured screenshots of everything you did, every document, every private message, every password field, and stored it locally in a searchable database, introduced without asking, enabled by default, taste, originality, culture. Steve Jobs named it in 1996. It just took Microsoft another 3 decades to prove him right in a way that nobody could ignore. To understand why the Jobs quote landed the way it did, and why it has come back with such force now, you need to put it in context. 1996 was not a good year to be Steve Jobs. He had been pushed out of Apple in 1985, spent a decade building Next, which sold few computers and went nowhere as a hardware company, and watched Apple drift toward irrelevance without him. Microsoft, meanwhile, had just shipped Windows 95 to enormous commercial success. Gates was on the cover of every magazine. The narrative was settled. Microsoft had won the personal computer era. The documentary was Triumph of the Nerds, produced by Robert X. Cringely for PBS. Jobs agreed to be interviewed, and in that interview, he said something that was both a concession and a verdict. He conceded that Microsoft had won. He said the problem is, with Microsoft having won, the big companies can just copy, and then the soul of the thing is gone. And then he made the taste observation. He said, I have no problem with their success. They have earned their success for the most part. The thing I have a problem with is that they just make really third-rate products. Third-rate products. No taste, no original ideas, no culture brought into the work. The tech press in 1996 read this as bitterness. A man who had lost looking for a way to explain why the winner deserved to lose. And on one level, that reading was understandable. Apple was struggling. Jobs was on the outside. Of course, he was going to criticize Microsoft. But there was a second reading, and it is the one that has aged better. Jobs was not talking about market share or financial results. He was making a claim about what happens to technology products when the people making them stop caring about the experience of the person using them. When engineering decisions get made for the company rather than the customer. When a product stops being something people love and becomes something people tolerate because they have no other option. He was describing a disposition, a set of priorities, a company that had learned how to win without learning how to make something worth winning with. And the reason that reading has held up is that it describes something recognizable, not just in Microsoft, but in exactly the decisions Microsoft has made with Windows 11 that have driven hundreds of thousands of people to Linux, to forums, to comment sections, to this channel, looking for a way out of a product that feels like it was designed for someone other than them. Jobs did not predict Windows 11. He did not know what recall was. He did not foresee the TPM 2.0 requirement. He described the company that would eventually build those things. And that is a different and more unsettling kind of prophecy. Start with the TPM 2.0 requirement, because it is the clearest example of a decision that fails the taste test Jobs described. When Microsoft announced that Windows 11 would require a Trusted Platform Module 2.0 chip, they locked out an enormous portion of the existing Windows user base overnight. The Canalys and Omdia research groups both estimated the number of Windows 10 machines that could not upgrade due to this requirement at around 240 million. Not broken machines, not ancient machines. Functioning computers, some only 3 or 4 years old, running perfectly well, that Microsoft declared incompatible with their new operating system. The stated reason was security. TPM 2.0 enables certain encryption and attestation features that Microsoft said were necessary for a modern secure OS. That is a real argument. Security matters. The TPM chip provides genuine protections. But the taste question is not whether the security argument is technically valid. The taste question is whether the people making this decision thought about the person on the other end. The person who bought a laptop in 2018 or 2019, paid $800 or $1,000 for it, and was now being told it was trash, not because anything had broken, because Microsoft drew a line. Jobs would have asked a different set of questions. Not just does this make Windows more secure, but does this decision serve the person who uses the product? Is there a way to provide the security benefit without declaring 240 million users obsolete? Did anyone in the room argue for the customer? The answer, judging by the result, appears to be no. Then came the mandatory Microsoft account requirement. To set up Windows 11 on a new machine, in almost all configurations, you are required to connect to the internet and log in to or create a Microsoft account. You cannot complete setup without it. The machine you bought, running software you paid for, will not finish configuring itself until you hand Microsoft your email address and agree to their terms. There are workarounds. There are command line methods. There are network tricks that fool the installer into thinking no internet connection is available. The fact that these workarounds exist and are widely documented across the internet tells you something. It tells you that a substantial portion of the user base wanted to do something the product was designed to prevent them from doing, and that they were willing to fight the product to do it. Jobs described taste as bringing culture into a product. One of the things culture means, in the context of technology, is understanding the relationship between a tool and the person using it. A tool that fights its user has failed at something fundamental. It may still function, it may still do the technical task, but it has broken the relationship. The Microsoft account requirement broke the relationship. It said, this machine is not quite yours until we have your information. It said, your setup experience will be held hostage to our business needs. It said, in the language of product design, rather than words, we want something from you before you can have what you paid for. And then there was recall. Recall was announced in May of 2024 as a flagship Windows 11 AI feature. The premise was that the operating system would take periodic screenshots of everything happening on your screen, run them through an on-device AI model, and make them searchable. The idea was that you could ask your computer what was on that website I was reading last Tuesday, and it would find it. The privacy and security community responded immediately. Researchers pointed out that the screenshot database would be a single high-value target for any malware that made it onto the machine. Everything you had ever typed, read, viewed, or done on your computer, stored in a structured, searchable format, accessible to any process with sufficient permissions. The database was initially stored without encryption. Security researchers demonstrated within days of the feature announcement that it could be trivially read by any other application running on the machine. Microsoft had built a surveillance tool, put it on by default, and shipped it as a feature. The backlash was severe enough that Microsoft delayed the feature, made it opt-in rather than opt-in by default, and eventually limited its rollout significantly. But the decision to ship it as designed, with the database unencrypted, and the feature enabled without explicit user consent, revealed something about how the product was conceived. Someone at Microsoft decided that the value of the AI demo outweighed the privacy implications for the person running it. Someone decided that the user would appreciate the capability once they got used to it. Someone decided that the friction of asking permission was not worth the clean demo experience. That is a taste failure in exactly the sense Jobs described. Not a technical failure, not a security failure in the narrow sense of a bug, a failure of values, a failure to ask the right question, which is not what can we build, but what should the person using this actually want us to do? Jobs said Microsoft does not bring culture into their products. Culture, in the product sense, is the accumulated set of values that shapes decisions when no one is watching. It is what makes a team ask the question Jobs would have asked, and the decisions Microsoft made with Windows 11, specifically TPM 2.0, the mandatory account requirement, and recall, are decisions that came from a team that was not asking that question. Subscribe now if you want to keep following this story. This channel covers the moments where technology decisions and the people affected by them collide, and the next one is already building. If you are watching this channel, there is a good chance you have already made the calculation Jobs was describing, even if you did not frame it that way. The migration from Windows to Linux that has accelerated over the last 2 years is not primarily a technical story. It is a trust story. People are not leaving Windows because Linux has better games or a better application ecosystem. In most categories, it still does not. They are leaving because the product stopped feeling like it was built for them. The TPM requirement told them their hardware was worthless. The account requirement told them they needed Microsoft permission to use their own machine. Recall told them the operating system was watching, and the relentless pressure toward subscriptions, toward cloud storage, toward a Microsoft 365 account, toward Copilot integration in places it was never asked for, told them that the product was no longer being designed around their needs. It was being designed around Microsoft revenue. That is the taste failure Jobs described. Not any single decision. The accumulation of decisions that, taken together, signal a company that has stopped thinking about the person using the product and started thinking about the company selling it. The older, technically capable audience watching this channel recognized that signal earlier than most because they have been using computers long enough to remember when software felt different, when an operating system was a tool that got out of your way, when installing something did not mean agreeing to 17 screens of telemetry permissions, when your computer did not take screenshots of your activity and store them in a database. That memory is not nostalgia. It is a standard, and Windows 11, measured against that standard, fails it. The question Jobs left open, and that remains open now, is whether the failure is correctable. Microsoft is a different company than it was under Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer. Satya Nadella has made real changes. Azure runs Linux. The developer tools have improved substantially. The relationship with open source is unrecognizable compared to the era Jobs was criticizing. But the Windows product decisions described in this script were made on Nadella watch. The taste problem Jobs identified in 1996 did not die with Gates-era Microsoft. It mutated. It moved from copying other products without credit to extracting value from users without permission. That is a different flavor of the same problem. And it is why the quote has come back. Here is the question. Jobs made this criticism in 1996, and Microsoft went on to dominate computing for another 3 decades. Does a taste failure actually matter if the product wins anyway? Or does it only matter now because Linux finally became a viable alternative? Drop your answer below. Jobs was right about something specific and important, and it is worth being precise about what it was. He was not right that Microsoft would fail. They did not fail. They are one of the most valuable companies on earth. He was not right that bad taste leads to market punishment because for most of the last 30 years, it did not. The network effects, the enterprise lock-in, the OEM dominance, the switching costs, all of it insulated Microsoft from the consequence of the product decisions Jobs was criticizing. What he was right about was the internal condition, the disposition of a company that wins by owning a platform rather than by earning continued loyalty, a company that can make decisions its users hate and absorb the backlash, because where else are they going to go? For a very long time, the answer to that question was nowhere. And so the taste failures accumulated without meaningful consequence. Users grumbled, forums filled with complaints. But the machines kept shipping with Windows, and the numbers kept growing. What changed is not Microsoft. What changed is the answer to that question. There is now somewhere to go. Linux Mint runs on that machine. Microsoft declared incompatible. It runs without a mandatory account. It does not take screenshots of your activity. It does not require you to agree to telemetry to finish setup. And, for an increasingly large number of technically capable users, it is good enough. Jobs could not have predicted that. He was criticizing a monopoly that looked permanent, but the criticism he made describes exactly the condition that made the monopoly vulnerable the moment an alternative appeared. No taste, no original ideas, no culture brought into the products. The criticism was always accurate. It just took until now for the alternative to exist that makes it matter. If this video made you think differently about why so many people are leaving Windows right now, share it with someone still stuck on the upgrade treadmill. The conversation about what we want from the software running our machines is overdue. Like if you want more of this kind of coverage. And leave your take in the comments. Did Jobs get it right? Or is this a reading too much into a quote from a man who had his own reasons to criticize Microsoft in 1996? The comments are open.